All set. You can move on to your next bill.
All right. The next bills that I have are House Bills 5749, 5750, and 5751. 5749 would repeal the Municipal Detention Facility Corporation law, which was created by the Rhode Island General Assembly many years back, and prohibit the operation of private detention facilities and private-public partnerships of that sort within the state. This bill does not seek to immediately close these prisons or put an undue strain on the Department of Corrections, as any private detention facility currently in operation would have until December 31st, 2028 to close its doors. H 5750 would prohibit contracts with private for-profit prison facilities or with the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. In my opinion, Rhode Island needs to get out of the business of immigration enforcement. Our history in the area has been a history of mistreatment, dangerous conditions, poor oversight, and even death. And I'll explain that a little bit further in my testimony. H 5751 would provide for a safety inspection of the Wyatt Detention Facility twice a year, unannounced. We've heard disturbing reports about private prisons cutting corners in terms of inmate care and sacrificing safety in order to improve the bottom line. Regular inspections would go a long way toward ensuring that the private prisons that we are all paying for are doing everything they're supposed to be doing and treating these inmates humanely. So why all these bills on prison reform and quasi-municipal detention corporations and reforming them? The private prison system has been a scar on our country, as quite simply it is a people-for-profit system that goes against who we are as Americans and who we are as Rhode Islanders, in my opinion. Work to dismantle the private prison system began under President Obama, and in January of this year, as part of his first set of actions as our new president, President Joe Biden signed an executive order that will phase out at least the Department of Justice's use of private prisons. President Biden stated that this is the first step to stop corporations from profiting off of incarceration that is less humane and less safe. He called it the beginning of his overall plan to address systematic problems in the criminal justice system. But we as a state have work to do ourselves. When private prisons and quasi-municipal detention facilities first began to emerge as part of the failed war on drugs in the 1980s, inmate populations began to explode, and as many of you know, we are now the most incarcerated country in the world. This boom in prisoners led to a boom in private prisons, and the Rhode Island legislature created quasi-municipal detention corporations that were marketed as a way for cash-strapped cities to earn a quick buck, but in my opinion were designed as a way to get certain entities out of paying taxes. This turned prisons into large, profitable, publicly traded businesses, and with profit placed before justice, we've seen those businesses advocating for tougher sentencing, which would lead to greater profits. Central Falls was one of the communities that had hitched its hopes on jails. Well, let me be clear, it actually wasn't the community that wanted this. Growing up in Central Falls, I never heard any one of my family members or friends state that they wanted state that building a prison in our tiny city directly across our main soccer field was a good idea. To be exact, it was the leaders of the community at the time, which, by the way, did not reflect at all the diverse makeup of the city's residents that were pushing for it. And thankfully, now that's changed. But in 1990, the city was struggling, and insiders and developers made a proposition: build a profit-making jail for 200 or 300 nonviolent federal detainees and guarantee a steady stream of money and jobs for Central Falls, leading to the creation of the quasi-municipal detention corporation and the Wyatt Detention Facility in Central Falls. In fact, CF was the only community that actually ended up with a prison in their backyard from that legislation. But there was just too much money to be made in this construction, with the city being last on the list to receive any impact payments similar to pilot fees. So, in essence, only after all bond payments and reserve savings accounts had been filled, the city would be paid. So in a short time, what started off as probably just a bad decision to build a small federal prison for the anticipation of at the expense of a few $1,000,000, snowballed into a 700-bed prison that now owes its bondholders more than $100 million in payments. So what does that mean? That means Central Falls and Rhode Island has a for-profit prison sitting in the poorest city in the state that owes so much money to their debtors and is built on a system where only the bottom line matters, which leads to numerous health violations, deaths, and escapes. That obviously had an impact on its revenue, that it is beyond all logic that they will ever be able to pay the city the hundreds of thousands a year that had been promised early on. So let's fast forward to today. If the quasi-municipal government entity were paying taxes as a private entity, they would have paid the city millions of dollars that would have gone towards lowering taxes, youth and senior programs, a community center which was closed during our bankruptcy, better roads, etc. All those good things. But the way it was set up by the state of Rhode Island makes it so that the city and its residents are the last in line and only get paid if the cells are full, after the bondholders have been paid and after the reserve accounts have been filled. A 2012 report from the Rhode Island Senate detailed that from 1994 through 2008, the city received a total of $5.3 million in impact fees from the Wyatt, and further $134,000 in 2009. Now, since the report was published in 2012, the Senate reported that since that time, Central Falls did not receive any payment from the Wyatt, which, according to the report, at that time, was a contributing factor to the fiscal challenges facing the city. And I don't have to go into detail about the financial struggles that my city has had in recent years. But in fact, in the past 12 years, the quasi-municipal detention facility has made only one small pity payment, I call it a pity payment, of $200,000 after the city brought them to court a few years back in 2015. So just to be clear, in 2010, the city of Central Falls received $0. 2011, $0. 2012, $0. 2013, $0. 2014, $0. 2015, $200,000 after being taken to court and settling on a forbearance agreement. 2016, $0. 2017, $0. 2018, $0. 2019, $0. 2020, $0. And 2020, I heard of maybe a small check of less than $50,000 may have been coming in. So, out of the approximately $6 million that would have been promised to the city from that time to now, the city has received between $200,000 and $250,000. Would you be okay with this if this was in your backyard? So while my residents had their homes foreclosed, their businesses shut down for not paying taxes, we have an entity that receives such a sweet deal. They have been able to remain open and active, causing harm and disruption, which I'll talk about in a minute, without paying a dime for the services that they use, for the roads that they use, for the police officers that are called over to the institution, for the fire department that they use, that my residents and really everyone pays for. And it's very frustrating. And so how would a quasi-municipal detention facility try to earn even more quick bucks? The easiest way? Hop on the anti-immigration train. With anti-immigration policies being instituted across the country in the past years, specifically the last 4 years, the Wyatt turned to ICE for revenue. Even worse, they specifically took on a zero-tolerance border initiative contract that sent people fleeing war zones and violence, just as my predecessors did when they came to this country from Colombia, that had been taken into custody in Arizona, shipped them across the country to be placed in a quasi-municipal detention facility alongside murderers and rapists. These are people that were seeking asylum. They were rounded up and literally moved across the country to tiny Central Falls, not knowing where they were going, how to access a lawyer, or how to even ask for health care. Many of them obviously not speaking the language well. I toured the Wyatt when this hit the news, and I will never forget walking into the wing where these asylum seekers were being held. Most of them were around 18 years old, maybe even younger, but they have to go by whatever, they don't have documentation on them, so they go by whatever age they say they are. And those people in that wing look like high school students. I felt that my heart broke because I felt like I was walking into Central Falls High School where I had graduated from. Like I was walking into the cafeteria and seeing my classmates from when I was younger. And it was really sad because these are individuals that were seeking clearly just a better life. And this isn't the first time that this has happened. In 2008, the New York Times did a piece that I've shared with all of you titled, "City of Immigrants Fills Jail Cells with Its Own." The piece tells of Central Falls residents being picked up off the streets and thrown into the Wyatt Detention Center for no other crime than missing a court hearing regarding their immigration cases, leaving their children and their families searching in agony for days without a clue where they've gone or what has happened to them. To me, it's honestly disgusting that that happened because of greed and hurtful rhetoric. But to add on, this experiment in private prisons has led to, more recently, more than 400 inmates and staff having contracted COVID-19 with very little accountability. Mind you, they only have about 500 inmates currently and over 400 cases of COVID. A judge recently required that the Wyatt release some of their inmates because there was a clear question of substantial risk of serious harm due to COVID conditions at the Wyatt. Conditions so bad, they've led to hunger strikes by inmates and protests from various community groups. Many of them are probably calling in today. And you may remember that back in 2008, a Chinese national inmate died to a lack of basic life-saving treatment. He was suffering from cancer and had a spinal injury, and it went untreated for months. And it's referenced in the article. And you may also remember that in 2017, the whole city was on lockdown after a dangerous prisoner, a felon, escaped due to a lack of staffing. He escaped out somehow from the basketball court, climbed over the barbed wire, started running down the streets of Central Falls. Our city was put on lockdown. Can you imagine what it's like to have to shelter your kids inside your small apartment because a fugitive just escaped from the prison that's within 1 mile of your home? Because my residents do. And it was on New Year's Day. It was horrific. How could that have happened? WPRI reported accounts of correctional officers at the Wyatt working up to 80 hours a week. 80 hours at that time. And that the lockup was running, according to a union official, with a bare minimum for shifts. Why? Because let's be real, these prisons are based on making whatever can get you the most amount of money. They have guards that in a recent incident showed a complete disregard for human life, running over protesters. You may have seen that in the news. Running over protesters and pepper spraying protesters right in the middle of the street. And somehow they got walked away, scot-free. If you haven't seen the video, I ask you to Google it. It's disturbing and disgusting. At the end of the day, these for-profit businesses only profit when their cells are full. This isn't an issue specific to the Wyatt, but it is our best example of how much of a failure quasi-municipal detention corporations have been. To me, growing up, understanding what an American is, this is not my definition of American values. And I ask all of you in joining me and stating that this system needs to end now. And Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, I don't know all of you very well, but I know from our conversations and what I've heard that you're all very reasonable and respectful individuals that all want what's best for your district and for the state of Rhode Island. I'm sure you're not for separating families as referenced in the article or as I reference here today. And that's what some of my bills aim to prevent. I know there isn't a single one of you in here that would honestly raise your hand to have this kind of institution in your backyard. After all, we're talking about an institution that is known for the death of an inmate, a dangerous fugitive escaping onto the streets, the imprisonment and criminalization of people risking their lives to flee violence and desperation, and one that your taxpayers are picking up the slack for. Again, 12 years, $250,000 when the city should have been receiving millions. You wouldn't want this sitting less than a mile from your home like it is with mine, or by your workplace, or by your child's school. So why is it okay for my community? Maybe it's because my community's voices weren't strong enough in the past. That could be the reason. Maybe it's because we're a poor community that was cash-strapped and looking for a lifeline. That could also be the reason. Or was it quite simply because nobody gave a damn about putting a prison next to a soccer field and next to a little league field because the kids in the community didn't look like them? To be honest, we'll probably never know, and at this point it doesn't even matter. Ladies and gentlemen of the House Committee on State Government and Elections, please help me right the wrong of our predecessors at the state level and at the national level to say goodbye to for-profit prisons and put the necessary regulations on them in the meantime, as some of my bills aim to do. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing me to testify today, and thank you for your consideration of this bill. And I want to give a quick shout out to the 60-plus people that have signed up or submitted written testimony in favor of my sort of package of bills, and to Senator Acosta for working with me over on the Senate side, and to the Never Again organization, the Interfaith Alliance, and many of the other community, many of the groups that have been saying and screaming this from the mountaintop for years. So with that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions, or I don't know if you want to take other testimony, but thank you for your time.
Second Vice Chair Corvasi has a question for you, Representative.
Representative, you have been very articulate this evening, and you have represented your community well, and you've presented quite a good case.
Thank you, sir.
I have one question which really is tangential to the merits of the bill, which has a great deal of merit. I'm not familiar with the federal system where, let's say for the sake of discussion, that Wyatt is gone. Where would federal detainees be placed?
And other federal detention centers that are...
Regardless of geography?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes people make fun of our committee hearings. They think they're perfunctory, but they're not. For things like this, I think they're actually very useful. I don't know much about the actual situation at Wyatt. This article you passed out was very interesting. I know it's 13 years old, but I will say I have a philosophical problem with private prisons, so I'm not going to shed any tears if the Wyatt goes away. But I just have a couple quick comments. One of your bills would prohibit the Department of Administration from having any contracts with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The issue of illegal immigration and what to do about it in this country is a very hot button issue. Obviously, nationally, it goes well beyond this debate.
Yes, sir. I
don't know what else the state may contract with ICE to do, so I have a problem with that provision of that bill, but that's got nothing to do specifically to Wyatt for me. I do have a question. I assume that the deadline of 2028, I think it is that when the current contract expires?
To be honest, we're not quite sure exactly when their last contract expires, because some have auto-renew factors, and I don't have a specific answer on that. That was the date that we had hoped would be far enough out into the future. that it would prevent any new contracts, but that's something that me and a few others are still working to clarify.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if we pass something, we don't get the city or the state into legal trouble because we break a contract or something like that. We have to, whether we like it or not, I think we have to let the contract play out unless we're prepared to buy it out in some fashion. My other question is just, I'm assuming the answer to this, but I assume the mayor and the city council are in support of getting rid of the prison at this point?
Absolutely.
Okay, I don't know if we have a resolution. I'm sure they would be, but do we have resolutions?
We don't have resolutions now, but I also have asked the city to think critically about the steps that they take, as many of them have been named in a lawsuit by the Wyatt already, many
Okay.
of the elected officials, for speaking up against the arrangement that the Wyatt has with the city.
Okay, and I'm sure it's considerable, but you mentioned a report. I mean, the cost to the city, fire, police, water, whatever the utility of those costs are, I assume they're in line. You can figure it out in the city budget. Economic impact on the city negatively is a real.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I don't have those off the top of my head, but I'm sure if they're not included in the 2012 report, I'm sure our finance director could in the city could figure that out.
Okay, my only other comment's a minor one, is that there's a provision in one of the bills about, I guess, no non-residents can be housed there, and that's assuming the prison stays in, I don't know if that's legally or constitutionally enforceable. I just want to point that out. Whether it's a good idea or not, it's not,
Understood.
I have a question and a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Felix.
Thank you so much. Rep. Geraldo, I just want to say thank you for submitting this bill, because as someone who has worked in the immigration world, representing clients and working directly with them, and having heard testimony and been at these rallies to close the prison, it's something the community does not want. And again, the way that you stated, I would never allow, if it was within my power, to have such a prison in Pawtucket, and I don't think Central Falls deserves it either. So I applaud you and Senator Acosta for submitting this bill. The one comment that I would like to have, or maybe an amendment done with this, is what a lot of the prison companies are currently doing is that once a private prison closes, they actually go into contract with the state and local governments for other services in order to recoup some of those revenues. For example, they do reentry services, and one of my concerns, I don't see any language in terms of prohibiting other types of contracts, and I would love to see, if possible, a provision in terms of not being able to do specifically reentry, because if you're in the business of putting people in prison and housing people in prison, then you shouldn't be in the business of putting them out and trying to, quote unquote, help them to reestablish their lives. This should be left to organizations in our community and helping, which we have many of them that do reentry and can do it well. So that's just the little amendment that I would like to see. But if it's already in the bill, then it's moot at that point. But again, thank you for submitting this, and thank you again for speaking so passionately about this issue. I'm in really strong support.
Thank you very much, Representative. I know that the bill speaks to the city of Rhode Island not doing any further contracts with private for-profit entities regarding prisons, but I'm not sure how reentry facilities would be classified. So I'll certainly take a look into that. And thank you for your support of this bill. And you mentioned that you've been at rallies and at events. And as someone who has had and has family members currently in the Wyatt, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Representative Knight, and then Representative McCaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rep, I appreciate these bills. You and I have talked a lot about this thing, and I just want to put out there, I support the idea of getting rid of the Wyatt. I find it particularly abhorrent that they chose to take part in the despicable acts of ICE over the last few years, particularly in their family separation policy. It's gross. It's awful, and I think we could talk about that all day. But I wanted to talk about some of the particulars in these bills, and I hate to be nitpicky, but along the lines of where Rep. Newberry was going. In the big bill that gets rid of in 5749, there's a lot of, after the repeal, there's some new rules that we would put in place for our Department of Corrections. And I think it's important for everyone everyone in the meeting to know that the Department of Corrections, the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, has nothing to do with the Donald J. Wyatt detention facility right now. But what I notice in here is that this has some broad language about banning the Department of Corrections from housing a prisoner in a private prison. And the only thing I would bring up, and I'm wondering if you've talked to them about this, is I think that might create some issues with the thing called the Interstate Compact on Detainees, which is the big contract that all 50 states and the federal government use to govern the transportation of prisoners across state lines and to have a cooperative housing arrangement for all kinds of reasons. Particularly if you have someone who is housed at the ACI, who has an enemies list, and in order to ensure their safety, you got to send them out of state. But when you transfer them out of state, you don't transfer them to the custody of a particular facility, you transfer them to the custody and care of a state. And then the state gets to figure out where they go. So if you send them to Texas, if Texas is using a private for-profit prison, is this going to limit our Department of Corrections' ability to run their interstate program? That would be my question. So that's worth talking about. And there's a couple of things that we could go offline, but I just think some of these bills, as it relates to the Department of Correction, we ought to get a closer look at if we're actually going to do this, because I think certainly the House of Representatives, by and large, would support this move, particularly because they're not coming through on their financial. It was a bad deal for Central Falls to begin with, and now we know it's a bad deal for Central Falls. The folks who run the Wyatt are bad actors. We know that because they've taken part in an immoral detention policy. It's one thing to house federal prisoners on a pretrial basis, which is the other part of the Wyatt. And to answer Representative Corvasi's question, if they're not at the Wyatt, they're at Plymouth or they're in New Hampshire. Plymouth House of Correction or up in New Hampshire. That's where the United States Marshals has them. They don't house them in Rhode Island because they don't have a setup. Sometimes they do, but not during the age of COVID. So there's like a few other places that the Marshals can put their Rhode Island detainees. So that's something to think about. And I had one last thing, but I can't remember what it was. I would say this with respect to Representative Felix's comments about discharge planning. While I appreciate Representative Felix's comments, the other side of discharge planning is that discharge planning requires a tremendous amount of coordination across the barbed wire. You have to have people inside the prison who are preparing the prisoner to be discharged to the outside, and you have people on the outside who are prepared to catch. And that coordination between the two is key. And we don't have a lot of that now because Rhode Island hasn't invested in discharge planning at the Department of Corrections. And to draw a sharp line and say that a corrections facility can't be engaged in discharge planning, I think would, it runs against the grain of the reality that you have to have communication across the barbed wire to do effective discharge planning, so that when people get put on the street, it's not literally the street, that they have a bed to go to, a roof, a warm place, something more than just a bus ticket and a see you later. So thank you for bringing the bill. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rep. Nye. And really, I think my purpose of bringing this bill forward along with Senator Acosta is to bring light to this situation. I am absolutely open to figuring out something that works. I don't have a legal background. I leave it to the experts, but I also am really interested in any amendments that this body might have. At the end of the day, I want to do what's right by my district, and I appreciate all of the comments so far.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments for Representative Giraldo? Representative McGaugh, and then Representative Nardone.
I want to thank you as well for bringing this forward. It's something that we've heard a lot about in the news, and, there's been so much discussion over the past few years about this, and I think you have presented your case very well, and so I want to thank you for that. In regards to Bill 5749, just if you could clarify for me, on page am I looking at here? Page 20 of the bill, there are some exclusions as to when some of these parameters would not apply. If you could maybe just talk about some of the exclusions and the rationale for excluding certain situations from this legislation. It talks specifically about, let me see, for example, any facility providing rehabilitative counseling, treatment, mental health, educational, or medical services to a juvenile that is under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court, as an example.
Yeah, to be honest, what I like to do is get back to you on that. I don't have an immediate answer, but I will take that back and respond to the committee with that.
Okay.
info.
Yeah, just curious. Thank you.
Representative Nardone?
Yes, Rep. Just want to say that, I'm not against this bill. I think that I never understood how you could get monetary gain from and incentivize keeping people behind bars for a longer period of time. But one thing, just for curiosity's sake, you said that they never paid any of their money to Central Fall that was due. Was that a contractual obligation that they just let fly by the boards, or was that open for?
Great question, and it all is based on the construct of the quasi-municipal detention corporations, in which are essentially a public-private partnership, in which it was designed that the city of Central Falls would receive impact fees for the impact of having an organization like that in your community. But the way that it was set up is that the city of Central Falls is last in line in terms of who gets the revenue. So bondholder payments first, and when the facility was originally built, I think the bonds that were taken out were maybe 30 million or a more reasonable number if you had a long-term vision, which I obviously agree with the whole premise of it. But if that was your thinking, the bonds were approximately somewhere around 30 million. So in the foreseeable future, you could envision a scenario where the bonds would be paid off and then the city would start receiving significant revenue. But in the shortly after, there was a tremendous amount of expansion happening that was approved by this legislature and added to that debt to a total of, I think, at its high point, it was like $120 million owed to the bondholders. And so therefore, the city being last in line, with the Wyatt having so many issues, the individual that died in 2008, the person that escaped, the protest, and all of the things that have happened there, the Wyatt has been losing their contracts. They go back and forth of losing their contracts, gaining their contracts, and so they have a flow of profit, for lack of a better term. And so in order for the city to be seeing money, really the entity would have to be at full capacity and running without an issue, which they haven't been. Too weird a calculation, and I know the city's been at battle for years with them to try to sort it out and figure out what are the benchmarks that have to be paid off first before the city receives money, and it's been really murky. But at the end of the day, 12 years, 250,000 max.
Representative Nardone?
Just one more question. You said they have to be running at full capacity in order for the city of Central Falls to get something, and providing there's no lawsuits, etc.
Yeah.
So they get the bottom. They're at the bottom of the barrel, essentially.
We're at the bottom of the barrel.
And you said that the Wyatt Detention Center right now is not at full capacity?
No, I think they're at 500 and something inmates out of the 770.
Okay, so that's about, what, 80% capacity,
Yeah.
we'll say. All right, thanks.
Representative Corvesi?
Representative Giraldo,
Yes, sir.
it appears that you have some broad political spectrum support for what you're trying to do with regard to the Wyatt. But I do have a question, and with all due respect to yourself, you admitted you're not a lawyer. Perhaps some of the other lawyers here can answer this for me. And perhaps Leader Newberry already touched upon this, but in 5750, that one line that says, no state agency shall enter into any contracts with ICE. Are there any set of parameters, legally or governmentally, that would necessitate the state to enter into a contract other than for a contract for a detention situation? And the reason why I ask that, are there other functions that ICE would have other than what the impetus is for this bill to do, that would be necessary for the state to enter into? Because if we were to pass this bill, you would preclude all those. So I'm just wondering if this one line on page 4, line 27 is a bit too broad, and you may want to, I see legal counsel is shaking his head. Have I hit something? Mr. Chairman, through the chair?
Yes.
Well, in reading it, Rep, it is a very broad term, and it may be unconstitutionally vague from the get-go, that particular line, because I'm sure that there are certain other functions that ICE has other than detainees at Wyatt, including, if the federal courts issue a civil warrant, and one of the other bills had that, one of the other bills dealing with ICE officials can't go to churches or sensitive places to pick up people, but if they do, it has to be based on a federal warrant civilly from a judge, and that deals with ICE as well. So I think that statement, I agree with you, is very, very, very
So
broad.
that being the case, Representative Giraldo, would you be willing to take another look at that and perhaps pare it down?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative
Mr. Chairman,
Tansey?
if I may make a comment, please?
Sure, go ahead, Representative Felix.
Thank you. When it comes to ICE coming into our prisons or coming in to pick up with a warrant for detainees, it's based more on a policy, not on a contract per se for them coming in. So in terms of the comment, and I understand it being too vague and having to maybe narrow a little bit more the language or clean up the language. I definitely agree with that, but I just wanted to state it's more of a policy. In the policy that was mentioned in terms of not going into sanctuary places such as schools or even churches, that's also a policy that was established by ICE, so it's not based on any contract, but it's just a longstanding function and role that they've made just to protect the communities from, when they are in those spaces, to feel protected and safe. So just wanted to make that comment. Thank you so much.
Representative Newberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I have a question, but to address Representative Corvesi's point too. I think if your ultimate goal is to shut down Wyatt, I think Bill 5749 is a better vehicle to do that than 5750. I see how they're slightly different, but just to be clear, when you talk about bondholders and the facility owes a lot of money to bondholders, those bondholders may be institutional investors, but they're all private, or they may be municipal, I don't know, but they're not the state of Rhode Island, they're not the city of Central Falls.
Correct.
If any, I just want to be clear for people watching, if Wyatt were to close, those bondholders would be out of luck, obviously, to a large extent. Those bondholders, if they happen to include anybody in Rhode Island, it's purely coincidental. They just happen to make a bad investment. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
My understanding, yes.
Representative Tansey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Rep. Giraldo, for this bill. You are doing your community very proud. I am strongly against for-profit prisons. I think they
are a horrible model, and I could not be in stronger support for eliminating them. I certainly would not want this established in my community, and I think it's on the verge of criminal the way that this was put into allowed to happen, the way that the city was put last on the list in terms of repayments, and my heart goes out to you all in the community. That being said, there's one other small piece in one of the bills that talks about mandating 2 inspections per year. What's the current policy for inspections, if you happen to know it? I'm just wondering what it would take in order to allow that to happen outside of the 2.
That's a great question. So my understanding is that the Wyatt has very little oversight in terms of state oversight. And the oversight that they have are with the entities that they actually have contracts with. And so I do not feel safe and do not feel confident in ICE, for example, especially under, let's say, our former president, being responsible for ensuring the safety of the inmates at the Wyatt and doing the safety sort of walkthroughs that are required to satisfy the safety requirements. And so therefore, since this is an entity that was created by the state of Rhode Island, I decided to move forward with an alternative option to ensure that the inmates that are there are being treated safely and with respect.
Yeah, I think 2 is a definite floor, and the possibility for additional, I think, is critical. At any point, our current corrections facilities here, I think that we should have, fair and free access to follow up on any, information that we're receiving from inmates or from their families. So I hope that this is one of the many bills that pass. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Representative Giraldo or Representative Knight?
I'll just say on the inspection front, as someone in the business, there's 2 customers at the Wyatt. It's ICE and the United States Marshals. Now, the United States Marshal side of things, the inspection regime, my understanding is relatively robust. During this COVID crisis, our 3 district court judges, United States district court judges in Rhode Island, routinely called the warden on the carpet about COVID response, and the Wyatt was responsive. The funny thing is, and this is I think goes to the opacity of the Wyatt, is I don't know, and I go to the Wyatt, I don't know anything about the ICE side. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what the cross-pollination is between the staff on the ICE side and the staff on the Marshal side. The death that you spoke about in 2008, which was, again, horrendous and despicable, and truly an example of, negligence and failure to even look and see another person as a human being, that was on the ICE side. Mm-hmm. So it's, if there's something that could be done along those lines, it would be interesting. I don't know if we could get past the legal barriers with the public-private thing, but it's an interesting idea.
Any further questions from members of the committee for Representative Giraldo? If not, we will be coming back later in the evening to go through the approximately 60 witnesses that have signed up in support to testify. Next, we will move to witnesses signed up on Representative Giraldo's bills, beginning with 5750. The first witness we have signed up on 5750 is David Velis. Is Mr. Velis available? Good evening, David. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing House Bill 5750, but I see that you are also signed up on 5751 and 5749. So you have the floor to testify on all 3 bills. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you to the chair, Thank you to the committee. My name is David Velis. I am the director of the Rhode Island Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty. I'm also here tonight as the co-chair of the Rhode Island Poor People's Campaign. I am honored here tonight to be here with you to speak against the profiteering of incarceration human beings. We already suffer from mass incarceration, but privatization incentivizes the locking up of people. We believe and support these three bills because we don't believe that private prisons have a place in Rhode Island. As far as Bill 5750, we are against the criminalization of the immigration process. Many of these detainees are just waiting for a hearing. They shouldn't be in a detention facility. This process is only separating families and locking up asylum seekers. It breaks my heart that people just like me are locked up because they are here seeking a better life and seeking the American dream. 5751 is a no-brainer. We need more oversight of the detention center and more care for the detainees. The pandemic has shown that we need to do a better job taking care of the human beings being held at Wyatt. Please pass these three legislations and ban private prisons here in Rhode Island. Thank you for your time, and thank you to Rep. Geraldo for introducing these legislations, and thank you to Rep. Morales for signing on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Velis. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Velis? Thank you again.
Thank you.
Next witness we have is Rachel Silverman. Good evening, Rachel. We're here discussing House Bill 5750. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Great, thank you. My name is Rachel Silverman, and I am testifying House Bill in support of House Bill 5750. I'm a Providence resident and Jew who has been personally traumatized by employees of the privately held Wyatt Detention Center. This month, Jews will celebrate Passover, where we mark our journey out of Egypt. Our Torah teaches us that we were liberated from enslavement and calls on us to act on this ancestral memory to liberate others. The terror that today's immigrants face under ICE echoes the terror that my ancestors felt. I always admired the civilians who resisted to protect Jews and other vulnerable communities. And that is why on August 14th, 2019, I attended Never Again Action's nonviolent protest at the Wyatt Detention Center. I sang and held banners with young and old unarmed activists who peacefully linked arms and blocked the parking lot. Then I watched a Wyatt captain drive in front of us and honk his horn. At first I thought it was by mistake, but then he accelerated and drove straight through the crowd mere inches from me. I watched people who were seconds ago right next to me get hit and fall, injured into the street, and several of them were hospitalized that night. The next thing I knew, Wyatt guards pepper sprayed us. I ran for my life. I was horrified, confused, and in shock. Why were we being targeted instead of the violent driver? My therapist has diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder from the events of that evening. It is difficult to talk about today, but I know I have to. Because if this violence to bystanders is enacted by ICE staff when cameras are on, what happens behind closed doors to detainees who are also promised basic protections by our country? And we have nationwide accounts of inhumane treatment of detainees in ICE facilities. These were not a few bad eggs at the Wyatt, but parts of a system built on corrupt power and human rights abuses. Rhode Island cannot have another contract with private prisons or ICE, or this mistreatment will continue. Thank you for allowing me to testify this evening.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you very much. Next, we move to Silas Gittin. Is Silas available? Hi, Silas. We're here discussing House Bill 5750. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Silas Gittin. I'm a Providence resident of Ward 13, and I am a public health data analyst. I am testifying today in support of bills H5749, H5750, and H5751. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the atrocities of the prison system for all to see. Now, 1 year into the pandemic, 55% of Rhode Island Department of Corrections inmates have tested positive for COVID-19. 94% of inmates at our maximum security facility tested positive. I'm going to say that again. 94% of the inmates at our maximum security facility tested positive. This is in comparison to approximately 12% of Rhode Island residents who tested positive for coronavirus. This happened despite the RIDOC operating at 12 to 15% less than their usual capacity, which is still less than the maximum capacity of these facilities. The outbreak at the maximum security facility happened in November 2020, long after protocols and PPE should have been in place to protect inmates and staff. This outbreak is a perfect example of how our prison system fails to care for inmates as people. I can't even imagine what that outbreak would have looked like at a for-profit prison that was financially motivated to operate at full capacity and was not required to publicly report these outbreaks. While these bills are focused on the Wyatt, I'm using these statistics from the RIDOC both to demonstrate that this issue is not unique to the Wyatt or to private prisons, and also because data from the Wyatt is more difficult to find because of lack of oversight of private prisons. In fact, a judge had to order multiple times for the warden to report on COVID statistics at the Wyatt. This lack of protection and attention to the health of inmates is not unique to COVID. It is an overarching problem of this system that threatens the health of the entire Rhode Island community. Inviting in private for-profit prisons with no public oversight would only exacerbate the problem. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Silas. Any questions from members of the committee? Next, we'll move on to Zoe Mermelstein from the College Democrats of Rhode Island. Is Zoe available? Good. Damien. Hi, Damien. How are you?
I'm good.
We're here discussing House Bill 5750. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less.
My name is Damon Jury, and I'm a high school student in Providence, and I am for Bill 5750. I think if we want prison reform, if we want to put an end to the unjust private prison industry, we need to extend that to ending ICE contracts as well. For the community of Central Falls in particular, this would be monumental. The Wyatt Detention Center is a looming presence in the city of immigrants. It's a place that sucks people in, separates families from their loved ones, and creates so much pain for the people of the city. Not only that, but the focus on profitability and this facility in particular has led to the gross neglect and mistreatment of its prisoners, as well as unchecked spread of coronavirus. Conditions were so bad that in April 2020, more than 60 inmates went on a hunger strike to protest these conditions, and in return, they were cut off from their phone calls, and people were forced into solitary confinement. In a state where so many of us are third and fourth generation immigrants, I don't understand why we can continue to let this happen, and also, why we still have these ICE contracts in place. That's all.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you. Next, we have Caterina Lorenzo. Good evening, Caterina. We're here discussing House Bill 5750 from Representative Giraldo. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for hearing my testimony today. My name is Caterina Lorenzo, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Alliance to Mobilize Resistance, known as AMOR. AMOR believes House bills, I will speak to both two bills here, 5749 and 5750 are important and critical and necessary because we think prison do not provide opportunities for rehabilitation. They only create the condition for traumatization, destigmatization, and torture through the practices of solidarity, confinement, insanity, and human living conditions. Within an institution that normalizes a culture of neglect and abuse, private prison create a for-profit model that relies on the condition that our society is willing to throw away members of our community. And with the bill that is connected with ICE,
No state agency shall enter into any contact with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE because ICE manipulates its budget to justify expansion and to seek more contracts. It also seeks to weaken standards in detention centers. With increase in funding from Congress, this would mean more profit for detention contractors, while conditions become even more dangerous for immigrants. Then that is my testimony. I ask you to support this passage. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Next,
No
we have
question.
Evan Rosinski. Good evening, Evan. We're here discussing House Bill 5750. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Welcome.
Thanks. I would just like to testify in favor of House Bill 5750, banning prison contracts with immigration customs enforcement. I don't believe that there's any moral or ethical purpose for them operating in Rhode Island. They're widely known for their cruelty, and I also just believe that deportation is a brutal act that helps no one. It's a big drain on resources, it ruins lives, and it tears families apart. So, call on Rhode Island to end all contracts with ICE immediately. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from members of the committee? Next, we move to Lindsay Wallace. Okay, Lindsay's not available, so Andrew Poyant. And then after Andrew would be June Hanna, Zoe Arnold Connor, or Janelle Chenair. Hello, this is Evan Shanley from the House Committee of State Government and Elections. We're here discussing House Bill 5750. Welcome, you have the floor.
Hi, my name is Andrew Poyant. I'm a Providence resident, and I'm calling in support of Bills 5749, 5750, and 5751. Someone was upset with one of my close friends previously, and in order to get back at him, they pressed false claims against him, and he was arrested because of this. As time went on, we realized that his public defender didn't have time to put any effort into his case. We ended up raising money for a lawyer. Finally, after 10 months of being in jail, his trial started. It quickly became apparent that the charges were false, so the jury ruled in his favor and acquitted him. His mother brought him to the U.S. as a child in order to seek more opportunities. And since he was undocumented, after being acquitted, he was sent to a detention center where he spent another month or two. This was in 2010, and he went to immigration court after being held in the detention center, and the judge gave him a few months to either decide to either go forward with marrying his girlfriend at the time or be deported. After he was released, I could tell he was never the same as he was before, and not as fun and happy as he used to be. And jail and the detention center changed him forever. He's no longer with us anymore. And I strongly urge all of you to vote in favor to move Bills 5749, 5750, and 5751 to a full House vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Andrew. Any questions from committee members? Okay, next we'll move to June Hanna. Good evening, June. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing House Bill 5750. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, this is June in Providence, and I am testifying in favor of 5750. In November of last year, I was on the street close to the Wyatt. I was wearing a mask with a couple of names on them, and one of the names was Hugh Liu Ing. He was a man from Hong Kong who was captured and held at the Wyatt because he didn't have a green card. He got cancer when he was at the Wyatt, and he tried to tell them that he was ill, but they thought he was lying, and so he died. When I was at the Wyatt, I was approached by two officers who saw his name on my mask, and they laughed because they thought that his name was funny. We were probably about 100 yards from the place that he was murdered, and they laughed at him. In 2009, ICE closed their contract with the Wyatt because of the press that they received after this happened. 11 years later, they reopened it. It's open still. I think it's critical to note that the reason that this prison has to close isn't that it loses money. It's that it loses people. We lose people. There's no choice. It has to shut down. It will.
Thank you, Mr. Hanna. We appreciate you calling in and appreciate your testimony very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Hanna from members of the committee? Okay, thank you again. Next, we'll move to Zoe Arnold Connor. Zoe is not available. Then Janelle. You have Nikita. Okay. Good evening, Nikita. You have the floor. We're here discussing House Bill 5750. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Hello, my name is Nikita Souza. I'm a resident of Providence and a public school teacher in Central Falls. I'm speaking in support of this bill. I have seen firsthand the ways in which the Wyatt has really torn down and teared down the Central Falls community. I have memories of holding students of mine when their parents have been detained by ICE in a community of immigrants. A building like the Wyatt and private prisons in general have no place in the state of Rhode Island, in our country. I mean, the school that I work at is right across from the Wyatt, and I would love to live in a world in which they are, presented with spaces that have them imagine a better world as opposed to punishment for a world that is often unfair and punishes people for circumstances out of their hand. I generally denounce all private prisons, and particularly the Wyatt, because of its unjust and unsafe conditions in there. There was a hearing with the warden at the Wyatt because of how unsafe the conditions were for people in COVID-19, the fact that people weren't really told what was going on with the pandemic, that so many people contracted COVID while in there. There was a hunger strike, and then they were retaliated against. Somebody has died in the care as a ward at the Wyatt. It's time for it to shut down, and we denounce all forms of cages and incarceration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from members of the committee? Next witness is Michelle Lopez. She's unavailable? Okay. Then the next witness is Tal Friedman, or Tal Frieden. (5749). Yes, we're through the witness list on 5750 and 5751. There are still about 55 witnesses signed up on 5749. So if everyone can try and consolidate their testimony to whatever extent possible and not repeat what's already been said, that would be much appreciated. Good evening. We're here discussing House Bill 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
Thank you. On August 16, 2019, I kneeled on a crosswalk outside the Wyatt Detention Center where... Hello?
You're still on the line. Go ahead.
I kneeled on a crosswalk outside the Wyatt Detention Center where over 36 people were participating in civil disobedience. Good trouble, as John Lewis called it. Shutting down the facility where Jason died of medical neglect 10 years earlier, and where over 120 people were being detained by ICE. I saw a bright light out of the corner of my eye and turned to see a 10,000-pound truck driving straight at me. I jumped out of the way. The truck stopped. Then, the Wyatt prison guard who was driving the truck honked his horn and accelerated into the crowd. While I moved to make sure no one was seriously injured, 12 Wyatt guards left their posts inside the prison, crossed the street, and fired pepper spray indiscriminately into the crowd. 5 people went to the hospital that night. The next morning, our group reconvened, and one question kept resurfacing. If this is how they treat us on the outside, what is the extent of the torture they perform behind the barbed wire? It didn't take long for us to find out. During the COVID crisis, hundreds of people were infected with the disease. Over 60 people in the Wyatt went on hunger strike to protest the inhumane conditions, and one sewed his own lips shut in protest of medical neglect. These stories are haunting, but unfortunately they're not unique. They remind me of the atrocities that my grandparents endured under Nazi rule, how their families were rounded up, forced to live in torturous conditions without medical attention and without any hope in sight. My grandmother told our family about surviving a Nazi labor camp, begging Nazi guards for food, for medical attention, and for anything to keep them alive. This is the reality in the Wyatt Detention Center, and unfortunately, it is the reality in prisons across the United States, both public and private. The deportation machine and mass incarceration tear our communities apart, separate families, cage children, and more. We hear the echoes of slavery, of Nazi genocide, and other historical injustices.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
It's time that we stop relying on incarceration. It's time that we end the criminal injustice system and the deportation machine. The people of Central Falls deserve this. The people of Rhode Island deserve this. And all survivors and victims of state violence deserve this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Not. The next witness on the list is David Oppenheimer. And after that, we have Isabella Vondel and Liza Berkeley. Good evening, Mr. Oppenheimer. Can you turn down the volume on your television, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't want to repeat too much of what Tal just said. I, too, want to discuss what happened on the night of August. The night in August he's discussing. I was a marshal on the night of the protest, and I crossed over to where the truck was stopped after it went into the crowd. I was on the driver's side of the truck when the prison guards arrived and issued and then they issued the only communication they attempted during the entire incident, and that was to get away from the truck. None of the guards had any device like a megaphone to communicate to the crowd with. As a marshal looking to de-escalate conflict, I passed in front of the truck to near the passenger side front door where the guards were establishing a perimeter around the truck. I moved in between two heated protesters and the guards and gently walked two protesters 3 or 4 feet away from the truck. I remember looking around at this point and noticing, and footage confirms this, that there were no longer any protesters close to the truck on that side, and that there were a number of guards fiddling with something in front of the truck. It was noisy, but not so noisy that orders could not have been given to the crowd by the guards, including the ones clearly in charge, but they made no effort to communicate with the crowd. Rather, the guards sprayed the crowd with pepper spray. Like the guards who were safely around the truck, I was not directly hit since I was a few feet from the truck. The spray had been aimed at the protesters who were not that close to the truck. From where I stood, the one order issued had been complied with, but the crowd was assaulted with pepper spray anyway. Clearly, the use of the pepper spray was preordained. Whoever ordered the guards down to help the guy in the truck had determined that violence would be employed. The lack of preparation for communicating with the protesters and the immediate default to the use of violence against the protesters illustrates the priorities of the Wyatt's management, eager to enforce its will using violence, which matches ICE's adoption of Trump's mission to impose violence and torture on migrants seeking sanctuary in the U.S. Institutions that default to violence as they cooperate with policies based on willful abuse and torture of detainees don't belong in our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Next, we have Isabella Vondel. Next, after that is Liza Birkin. We have Liza, okay, and after that would be Nathan, Levine, Aspensen, Enrique Sanchez. Good evening, Liza. How are you?
Hi, I'm well, thank you.
We're here discussing 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you to the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify. My name is Liza Birkin. I'm a Jewish American living in Providence. My uncle's father, Hertz Hirschberg, recently died at the age of 92. He was able to live such a long life because of a man named Oskar Schindler, who helped him escape the atrocities of the Holocaust, which might have cut his life short. As Jews, we learn the phrase never again from a very young age. We learn to idolize people like Schindler, who had no real skin in the game himself, but was just fighting for the inherent dignity and value of all human life. When we have drawn comparisons between the Holocaust and the detention of migrants and other people in camps at the border and institutions like the Wyatt Detention Center, we have been called overdramatic and inconsiderate, sometimes even by fellow Jews. But this is not about the end of the Holocaust. It's about the beginning. It's about the dehumanization and systematic indignity that led to the so-called final solution. And is there anything more dehumanizing than allowing private companies and their bondholders to make a profit off of the detention and caging of human beings? Whose profit depends on cost-cutting measures to basic human needs like food, clothing, and medicine? The Wyatt was the first quasi-private prison in the country, and it's been nothing but a mistake, a massive mistake, a stain on Rhode Island's history. We're supposed to be a place of religious and cultural tolerance, of freedom from tyranny. And you all have the power to finally correct this mistake. In Fox Point, there's a monument with a quote from Roger Williams that reads, "And having a sense of God's merciful providence unto me in my distress, called the place Providence I desired. It might be for a shelter for persons distressed conscience." How do we think that Roger Williams would feel about the Wyatt? Pretty sure he would want to shut it down. So please close this institution and prevent others like it from ever occupying a piece of Rhode Island's land again.
Thank you
Never
very
again.
much for your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from members of the committee? Next, we'll move to Nathan Levine Aspensen. Good evening, Nathan. You have the floor on 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Since my time is brief and you have requested that we not retrod old ground, I won't bore you with another first-hand account of my own experience with the Wyatt prison guard assaulting a group of a dozen of my comrades with a pickup truck, or how it felt watching the driver advance another full car length into the crowd after colliding with the wall of human beings, or remind the committee again that this facility killed Jason Ng through malicious medical neglect and to this day laughs at their crimes. Instead, I'll take my time tonight to appeal to your conscience and your sense of the legacy of this state. The Wyatt is and was the first private prison established in the United States. It was the very first facility within these borders to take the already vile practice of imprisonment and turn it into an activity for the profit of a small handful of private investors. And as was already discussed earlier in the hearing, not for the benefit of the community that it sits in. And I urge the members of the committee to think, if that is the legacy you want for the state of Rhode Island, to go to bat for a facility, for a practice that provides no benefit for the community, that destroys people and families, that acts as a holding pen for the prisoners rounded up by this horrible agency, ICE, around the country, and do the gruesome business of detention when neither the state or the city of the Central Falls nor its citizens benefit from it or want it to be there. Do you want to be remembered as the people who finally shut this place down and did the right thing, or do you want to be remembered as the people who stood in the way while the people of Rhode Island shut it down for you? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from committee members? Next, we'll move to Enrique Sanchez and then Kristen Haynes. Good evening, Enrique. We're discussing House Bill 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Yes, thank you. My name is Enrique Sanchez. I'm here representing BLM RIPAC and Providence DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. I have the opportunity to testify in support of 5749, 5750, and 5751, correct?
Correct.
All right. So, yeah, I am here as a Mexican-American, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx person, whatever you want to call me. I'm here in support to shut down the Wyatt Detention Center. I am here in support to end private prison and ICE contracts in Rhode Island. And I am here to also in support of House Bill 571, which is a 2-year unannounced safety inspections until Wyatt is closed. My family has been around here in the state of Rhode Island and Providence for more than 30 years now, since 1988. We opened up one of the first Mexican businesses in Providence, Sanchez Market. Throughout these entire last 3-4 decades, we have helped folks who are undocumented in the Mexican community, Guatemalan community, Central American community, Caribbean community, and we have also had people who have been arrested in our circles, in our community, and have been sent to the Wyatt Detention Center. I've had a friend who was deported from Central Falls about 3 years ago back to his home state in Querétaro, Mexico, in the state of Querétaro. He was there for about, he was in the Wyatt Detention Center for about 3 or 4 months, I believe, before being sent to Boston and ended up being deported back to Querétaro. As Rhode Island becomes more diverse, more inclusive to all people, different backgrounds, different communities, I cannot help but think that we still have these institutions that exist in our states that separate families, that separate loved ones, and that uphold illegal, morally illegal wrongdoings to many families and loved ones across the states. We have to move towards a path that will...
Can you wrap it up, Enrique? You're over the 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay, we have to move towards a path that will include a more inclusive community, and I would like to thank the committee for hearing this out, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Any questions from committee members? Next, we'll move to Alexandra Burkhoff. Good evening, Alexandra. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Alexandra Burkhoff, or Sasha, and I am I live in Providence, and I am calling about the bill to shut down the Wyatt. I think that a lot of what I've said, I'm also with Never Again Action, has already been covered by David Oppenheimer and Paul and Nate, who all spoke before me. I was also at the protest where a Wyatt guard drove into a crowd of people engaging in civil disobedience. But one thing that I would like to highlight is that thanks due to work by the Rhode Island ACLU, the Wyatt is supposed to post its COVID numbers each week, actually twice a week, to the Rhode Island District Court's website. It hasn't been updated in a couple of weeks now. But if you look at the numbers, even from February 4th, the total number of people who have tested positive within the Wyatt, the total number of positive cases is huge. It's 426 people have been tested positive. And remember that this is a facility that holds at any given time between 500 and 600 people. So we know, even with this very limited information that they give us, we know that the Wyatt is doing a bad job of handling the COVID pandemic. And we can only assume that they're doing a bad job looking after the health and the welfare of people inside them, even before this pandemic was an issue. I just think that whatever it takes to get this closed and to make sure that, we can limit detention in general, and we can make sure that at the very least any detention that happens isn't done by some private entity without accountability to the outside world, needs to be done. And that's why I support 5749, 5750, and 5751.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from members of the committee? Okay, next we'll move to Caitlin Carroll. Good evening, Caitlin. You have the floor on 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. I wanted to say that I'm in support of House Bill 5749 to require the detention center to shut down when its contract ends. Other than it being a humanitarian plight in a state where there are so many people who are immigrants, and we claim to be proud to be immigrants, it would stop the state from allowing public or private prisons like the Wyatt from continuing. It would also stop incarcerated Rhode Islanders being held in other states. So I'm technically in support of it.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions? Thank you very much. Have a great night. Next witness we have, Gregory Wakamalewski. I butchered that name, I'm sure. Sorry, Gregory. Good evening, Gregory. You have the floor on House Bill 5749. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. So I do. I would like to first of all thank everyone in the committee. Your leadership has been so vital so far this session and will continue to be. Huge thank you to absolutely everybody from all the communities taking time out of your private lives as citizens to come down and participate in civic duty. I only have a couple of things to say. 5749, 5750. These are an opportunity to really get something done. This is an opportunity to state plainly and clearly that in Rhode Island we have certain values. My mom's from Mexico, and I have a lot of family in this country and over in Mexico, and we all know about La Migra, and we all know how hard it is for people in any time to achieve a piece of the American dream in a legal, safe way. And that was hard enough until 2001, when with the stroke of a pen, the Bush administration created ICE. And ICE has operated with zero accountability in this country ever since. They seem, at some times, to be an almost extra-legal police force. I have heard stories from people here in Central Falls, Pawtucket, and Providence telling me about how their children were afraid to be out on the playground after school to wait for their parents because they had seen ICE agents show up and kidnap parents and harass children. They have seen ICE agents standing outside of job sites waiting to do the same thing. I, as a member of the First Unitarian Church, was fighting for sanctuary for undocumented immigrants who are being targeted by this extra-legal police force. We were told plainly by legal advocates that if ICE agents showed up, there was almost nothing that they couldn't do, that the Constitution didn't apply when they were on the job. That's a strange job. So what can we say in Rhode Island?
Wrap up your testimony, please.
Add one line to General Law 4211, strike out in red lines the entire chapter that empowers corporate entities to fund bad neighbors, and we can say that Rhode Island doesn't allow an unaccountable Gestapo to terrorize communities based on their perceived country of origin or ethnicity. There's a chance to say never again. We know you're going to do the right thing. Recommend these up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from members of the committee? No questions. Have a great night. Next witness we have is Nina Wolf Landau.
I didn't.
Hi, Nina. You have the floor on House Bill 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you very much and welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and thank you for your time tonight. My name is Nina Wolf Landau. I'm a Providence resident. I live in Representative Blazajewski's district and Senator Goodwin's district. I'm here tonight to testify in support of House Bill 5749. I'm sure you've heard lots of other really amazing testimony tonight, so I really just want to urge all the legislators to support this legislation. We know that our immigrant neighbors are being held in terrible circumstances, in terrible conditions in this detention center, and I strongly urge each and every one of you to consider the fact that no human should be held in detention, and we as a state need to continue our work to decarcerate during COVID, to decarcerate in general, and to support the ending of all types of private detention centers and prisons. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from committee members? Thank you very much. Have a good night. Next witness we have is Brooklyn Toussaint. Welcome, Brooklyn. You have the floor on 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
My name is Brooklyn Toussaint. I'm 22 years old, and I do live in Providence, Rhode Island. I signed up to testify today for House Bill 5749 that would require the Wyatt Detention Center to shut down when the contract ends. I believe that this is a bill that our representatives should be in favor for. The Wyatt Detention Center has personally affected my life. It has held people near and dear to me that I know with different circumstances would have had different outcomes in their lives. I don't believe that a detention center that is corroding is one that anyone should be in, especially during a pandemic. I feel like the Wyatt Center has done enough harm. And when this contract ends, it is up to you guys to make sure that you're hearing these testimonies. We always get this information very late, yet we still always show up and we show out being Rhode Island residents. I urge you all to listen to the people of Rhode Island that will call in, that have sent their emails, that are urging you guys to be in favor of this bill and pass it to make sure that the state does not allow any more private or public-private kind of prisons like the Wyatt Detention Center. Prisons that do not do anything for our people, don't rehabilitate our people in any way, shape, or form, and bring them back out into a society that has well past them, left them behind in the time that they were serving. And I really urge our representatives to hear our voices. And again, I'm a Rhode Island resident. I'm 150% in favor of this House Bill 5749 to be passed, and the Wyatt Detention Center needs to be shut down. This is Brooklyn Toussaint. I'm done testifying.
Thank you very much, Brooklyn. Any questions from members of the committee? Next, we move on to Emma Boughton. Good evening, Emma. We're here discussing 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Emma Boughton. I'm 23 years old. I live in Providence, and I'm here supporting House Bill 5749 to require the Wyatt Detention Center to shut down when its current contract ends and to stop the state from allowing private or public-private prisons like the Wyatt. We can't continue to allow our state to imprison people in inhumane conditions for profit. I was there at the protest back in August 2019 when Thomas Woodworth drove his truck through a crowd of peaceful protesters. I left the protest a little bit before it happened, and I remember feeling terrified as I got a call from a friend who was checking in to see if I was okay, and then filled me in about what happened. It was deeply unsettling that he committed this violent act while being videotaped. I have no doubt that folks incarcerated at the Wyatt are frequently treated inhumanely, especially when a crowd of protesters is not watching. I want to live in a state where folks are welcomed and helped to thrive. Immigration makes us stronger, and Rhode Island should not be a part of the deportation machine. It's time that the House pass 5749 and stop the atrocities happening at the Wyatt. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Taylor. Any questions from members of the committee? Next witness we have is Lillian Kirby. Good evening, Lily. You have the floor on 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. My name is Lily Kirby. I'm a resident of Providence and a community organizer. I'm testifying today on behalf of myself to urge the committee to pass this bill and shut down the Wyatt. Please listen to your constituents tonight as we emphatically tell you that we don't want any more prisons in Rhode Island. We don't want any more of our neighbors and loved ones and community members suffering in brutal conditions. We want the Wyatt shut down. What a unique opportunity for the legislative body to take a stand alongside the protest movement and the organizing community, alongside the working class and low-income people of Central Falls, alongside all of those who have been pushing to decarcerate our state and stop deportation. What an opportunity to say that justice is more than punishment, that justice can be care, that justice can be an investment in healthcare, education, and housing, instead of in surveillance, silence, deportation, and dehumanization. As many have reminded and will remind us tonight, the modern-day prison system is a manifestation of the evils of slavery and colonialism. The human rights abuses behind closed doors and barbed wire demonstrate that prisons like the Wyatt are not the answers to violence and harm, but in fact cause and perpetuate this violence. The Wyatt functions more as a method of social control over poor people, black people, and people of color than as a form of justice. If we really want to move towards a world of peace and equity, we can't continue to use a carceral logic. Please vote to shut down the Wyatt. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from members of the committee? Next, move on to Megan Lynch. Good evening, Megan. We're here discussing House Bill 5749. You are signed up in support. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to less than 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be brief. My name is Meg Lynch, and I'm testifying in support of House Bills 5749, 5750, and 5751 as a citizen of Cranston, Rhode Island. I do not believe that prisons make our society better, and certainly not when those prisons are built to turn over a profit. Our country's carceral punitive system is harmful, racist, and in the case of the Wyatt, actually actively endangers the health and safety of those who are incarcerated. When I imagine a better world, I imagine one that welcomes all people with open arms, one that aims to help people live and thrive instead of locking them up away from their loved ones. After watching Thomas Woodworth accelerate a truck into a crowd of peaceful protesters on video, I do not trust the Wyatt staff to treat those who are in prison humanely or compassionately, especially not behind closed doors. I believe that a better world, one without prisons or police, is possible, and here in Rhode Island it starts with shutting down the Wyatt. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from committee members? Next witness we have is Christina Marcelo. Good evening, Christina. You have the floor to discuss House Bill 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing my testimony. First of all, I would just like to say that I think the bulk of this bill I support fully, and I'd like to start by saying that overall, when we invest in our community, it pays off. And investing in the community will pay off more in the long run than investing in private prisons. This state was founded on freedom of all types. We've been known as Rogue Island at times, and I think in that spirit, we need to talk about moving prisoners away, and how that is not helpful to our community. I think the basis of what I would like to get at is that people's lives are not more important than private businesses. They are not more, in fact, our community, people's lives, they are more profitable in the long run. If we continue to privatize these prisons, we know what that has done, and we know the impacts that has had in our communities. People who work in these private prisons do not have the proper education that they need because the private prisons do not fund them because they're privately funded and they aren't held to those expectations. When we don't fund our community, we don't fund ourselves. And so, all in all, I thank you for listening to my testimony, and I think that it is crucial that we end private prisons in the state, and furthermore, that we keep prisoners in our state who, may be having job training within the prison, but when we move them out of state, then we lose jobs. At the end of the day, it is not profitable to continue having private prisons, and in a capitalistic society, if our goal is to continue to make money, it is counterintuitive to rely on private businesses when we know we can rely on our people. So thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you very much, Christina. Any questions from members of the committee? Next witness is Lily. Is Lily available? Good evening, Lily. We're here discussing House Bill 5749. You're signed up in support. You have 2 minutes to testify. Thank you very much and welcome.
Good evening. First, thank you for giving me the time to testify. My name is Lily Rhode. I was born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island, and have been an avid and active member of our state. I've worked for a number of youth programs that prioritize underserved communities, such as Breakthrough Providence, Neighbor Works in Woonsocket, and College Crusade for the Segway School right in Central Falls. Now I'm in my final semester to get a degree to become an educator for the public school system. But to fund this degree, I actually worked as a state employee for the Department of Corrections for over 7 years. Now, with this background knowledge, knowing the numerous ways in which our rehabilitation systems fail our communities, I say that I am in favor of Bill H. 5749. Now, during my time as an employee of the DOC, I saw firsthand the lack of accountability and efficacy in our state prison system. I saw and I know the failures that those being released from incarceration face. So what does the state do when someone's locked in a building? Do they provide effective rehab? Is there job training? Are there education programs? Or what about mental health or substance abuse programs? In short, the answer is no. People are often arrested and left with little or no recourse. And so the state of Rhode Island and the DOC has no business in private endeavors, such as its contract with the Wyatt Detention Center, when it has shown time and time again that it cannot even serve its own community. So as a daughter of immigrants who came to the U.S., I cannot imagine the idea of my parents or family being taken away from me and then being forced into unhealthy conditions, especially during this pandemic. So how do I, as an educator, tell a student that their parents have been arrested for coming to a place that's supposed to make their lives better? Borders are not real. ICE and immigration are protecting land that isn't theirs for claiming, and in doing so, they are uprooting families that contribute to the livelihood of our communities. So please close Wyatt, end the contracts, and thank you very much. I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Lily. Any questions from members of the committee? Next witness we have is Rachel Victorin. Good evening, Rachel. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, welcome. I'm speaking on the bill, House Bill 5749, that requires the Wyatt Detention Center to shut down its current contract, and it stops the state from allowing private or public prisons, and it stops incarcerated Rhode Islanders from being held in other states. I'd like to speak in favor of that bill because I believe what the Rhode Island is doing to their citizens is inhumane. For such a small state, you guys have a really, really big problem with, treating people like humans, and it's time that stops. I'm here in Kennedy Plaza as a part of a group of people that come and help out every single day in our community because we care about people here. We care about homelessness. We care about people who are food, who are in shelter, and I feel like Rhode Island does nothing to help with that. They do absolutely nothing. So it's really funny how they have such a big say when it comes to prisons, when it comes to incarcerating people, but when it comes to helping people avoid prisons and avoid getting into trouble, they do nothing. So it's like instead of trying to build more prisons and try to lock people up, how about y'all come out in the streets, or people who have the power to come out in the streets and help the people sleeping in the cold? Do that instead of always worrying about arresting people and locking them up, because that, to me, is the best deal is the best deal that's going to help the generation tomorrow. You want to see people avoid prisons, help them while you can. And then don't worry about you locking them up and sending them to other states and giving them inhumane conditions, killing people in prisons, cremating them and not letting the family see them before they die or before they're cremated. You're not having permission. I can't even speak right now. I'm livid. So, yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much for your testimony and your passion. Any questions from members of the committee?
I want to know what you guys are doing right now.
No, it was for us to ask you questions. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. Thank you very much for your testimony. Next witness we have is Catherine Goldman. Good evening, Catherine. You have the floor on House Bill 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. My name is Kate Goldman. I'm a Rhode Island resident, the spouse of an immigrant, and the parent of 2 biracial and bicultural children. I'm also the head of university and academic partnerships for Respond Crisis Translation, a global network of translators and interpreters committed to language justice and immigrant rights. I have volunteered on various occasions to help immigrants held in for-profit immigration detention centers, traveling to a few of them, including the country's largest family detention center in Texas. I have handled dozens of asylum cases as a volunteer translator and legal advocate over the past 3 years. I support House Bill 5749. I have seen firsthand the lasting damage that is done to individuals, families, and communities by for-profit and public-private prisons like the Wyatt. I have attended several protests in Central Falls around the Wyatt and have seen the individuals detained there bang on the windows and cry out for us. I have no trust in the Wyatt staff's ability to treat prisoners in a humane and compassionate manner. Indeed, having been inside of such facilities and worked with detained families and individuals, I have come to understand that there is no such thing as compassionate or humane for-profit detention, and there is no place for such a facility in Rhode Island. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Next witness is Elaine Shen. Good evening, Elaine. We're here discussing House Bill 5742. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, thank you. Dear members of this committee, my name is Elaine and I'm a Providence resident and child of immigrants. I will keep my testimony short in favor of community organizers and those who have already spoken. I would like to thank Representative Giraldo and co-sponsors of House Bills 5749, 5750, and 5751. Representative Giraldo and other community members have outlined very clearly the many ways why the Wyatt Center is unsafe, inhumane, and financially unconscionable. I am encouraged to hear that there is broad bipartisan support for these bills in this committee, and I urge you all to move to pass these bills as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Elaine. Any questions from members of the committee? No questions? Thank you very much. Next witness we have is Manuel Antonio Rodriguez. Manuel's unavailable, so the next witness on the list is Douglas Taylor, followed by Caleb Gonsalves, Galadriel Brady, Anthony Robert Tenaro. I'm going to read out the names of everybody left that is signed up to testify. Lindsay Paleka, Rabbi Dardashiti, Rebecca Shays, Charlotte Abatzi, Celia, Zoe Arnold Connor, Darcy Denigan, Molly Scavuzzo Duggan, Sean Richardson, Annika Green, Katie, Talik Vigil, Andy Birch, Robert Hoffman, Charlotte Richards, Leah Wamelsdorf. So if you are on the list and still going to testify, please try and be available so that we can move through the rest of the witnesses as efficiently as possible. Excellent. Hi, Lindsay. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Representative Giraldo's bill. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lindsay Pleka. I'm a third-year medical student at Brown and resident of Rhode Island. As a physician in training, I join the voices on this call, as well as medical providers across the nation who have denounced the troubling reality that people inside the walls of ICE facilities are neglected as prisoners rather than treated as patients. Although Bill 5750 was written timely to the Wyatt Detention Center's failure to respond to the impacts of COVID, this evening I would like to share just one patient story to highlight what an ICE facility considered medical care prior to the pandemic. In the summer of 2019, I had the opportunity to work with a physician here in Providence. We were caring for several young adults who had recently been released from an ICE facility. When the teens arrived at the appointment, within seconds of the visit, it was obvious that their hair, skin, even their eyelashes were covered with lice. The infestations were so severe that only systemic anti-parasitic meds would suffice in fighting off the bugs. On physical exam, their arms, legs, abdomen showed significant cuts and abrasions, many which were infected. The patients shared with us that the officers at the facilities would only give them dishwasher detergent to wash themselves. One of the patients was diagnosed with prediabetes, as he was only given white bread to eat during the 6 months he was held in a facility. In this moment, we cared for the patients the best we could. We prescribed the antibiotics they needed. We connected them with the community resources they need for food. We did what we are trained to do, heal, not harm. This story, like so many others, shows the profound ineptitude of ICE facilities to provide the standard of medical care, with or without a pandemic. When we talk about patients who have COVID, especially those with asthma or COPD, the treatment is nothing short of labor intensive. It requires nurses to tend to 1 or 2 patients at a time. It often requires physicians specialized in critical care. ICE contracted facilities will never be equipped to coordinate such complex medical care. Their existence only allows for more suffering, disease, and death. Moral and public health necessity requires private prisons contracted by ICE to stop. Thank you all for your time and the many voices who contribute to this call.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Any questions from members of the committee? Next, we'll move to Rabbi Michelle Dardashti. Good evening, Rabbi. We're here discussing 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome. Rabbi?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Hi, sorry about that. So I believe that the Wyatt has allowed itself to be a tool in the hands of the administration to carry out a program against immigrants. I don't think that we should be in the business of supporting a private prison that makes money off of people who are seeking asylum, people who are trying to come to this country for a better life. As a faith leader, it's very important to me to be thinking about how we are treating the stranger and how we are taking people in. That should not be a source of income, and that is not what Central Falls and what our state needs more of in our society, in our midst. That should not be how we're making our income. Also, I was present on the evening in the summer, in August, in the summer of 2019 at that protest, and there was a peaceful protest, and it was shortly after I left that an officer drove into a crowd at which I had students. And it makes me very scared to think how inmates are treated if peaceful protesters and students who are there were treated the way that they were by officers at the Wyatt. I don't think it belongs in our state.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Rabbi. Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you again for calling in. Next witness we have is Rebecca Shays. Good evening, Rebecca. We're still here discussing House Bill 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you, committee members. Thank you for taking the time today, really, to listen to our testimonies. My name is Rebecca. I'm from Providence. I currently live in District 8. I'd like to voice my support, as many others have already done, for Bill 5749. This is a piece of legislation that would stop Rhode Island from continuing to foster the imprisonment of people who are just trying to have a better life for themselves and their families. It's pretty disappointing, honestly, to live in a state that locks people up and it separates families and then turns to those same families in the public outside of the barbed wire to say, you know, this is helping our economy, don't worry, it'll lift our economy. When reality, from the beginning, that was and is simply not true. The Wyatt contributes to Central Falls' debt while at the same time upholding inhumane living conditions for those it profits off of. When detainees try and speak up about this, the Wyatt fails to listen. People inside grieving and suffering enough to initiate a hunger strike, and even that wasn't enough. People being detained and placed in isolation and separated from their loved ones, but not trying to escape an actual virus inside a prison that could kill them and any opportunity that drove them to our community in the first place. Wyatt fails to listen, and then people on the outside have also mentioned this. You know, one person being my grandmother, who, as you heard history already mentioned before, had met the same fate. Her family had met the same fate when they were unable to flee Nazi incursions into their countries. She was there when Thomas Woodworth drove his truck into her and other peaceful protesters, also mentioned before me. This was a moment, though, that the public could see the true reality of how people are treated by the Wyatt and ICE behind closed doors. If the guards are so poorly trained when encountering protesters, what must their actual job training be like? And what are we to believe about the way detainees are treated? The Wyatt is clearly a poorly run, disorganized facility, and those seeking refuge should get the same opportunity my family did when they came to America, the same opportunity most of you guys on the committee got coming to the States. And so we should close the prison down and end our contracts with ICE, help bring these families back together, and do what so many of the community is saying. I mean, I heard a couple of times, please don't repeat other people's testimony, but this is a shared experience, a shared concern through the community. When the moment in America that people are feeling separated politically, there's one moment where your community is all saying the same thing, which is shut down the Wyatt. You guys really have only one answer here. So I think the plan is to continue repeating our testimonies until you guys, begin to stop allowing history to repeat itself.
Thank you for your testimony, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Any questions from members of the committee? Next witness we have is Charlotte Abatzi. Good evening, Charlotte. We're here discussing House Bill 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, my name is Charlotte and I'm a resident from Providence, Rhode Island. I'm testifying in support of House Bills 5749, 5750, and 5751. There is absolutely no need for ICE to exist in Rhode Island. If we pay attention to the lawless actions that ICE has implemented over the past 18 years of its existence, ICE is a rogue agency. ICE has no regard for human life, and Rhode Island should lead the charge in the nation to stop entering new contracts with ICE. ICE was only formed in 2003, so many of us can remember a time before ICE. So I urge you to vote to end new ICE contracts across Rhode Island. I'm asking you to please listen to your constituents on this. Just based on the overwhelming number of people who have lined up to speak tonight, we have been waiting hours, right, to get our voice heard, right, just for finally, now the 2 minutes are being implemented after the whole night. But okay. So many people have sent emails testifying to this. We are demanding to end the presence of ICE in our communities. And I pray that you hear us to vote to end ICE contracts across Rhode Island. And the Wyatt Detention Center is the only publicly owned but privately operated prison in this country. This humiliating fact bears repeating. The Wyatt is the only publicly owned and privately operated prison in this country. It is shameful that the Wyatt gets paid per each person they capture. We must end this process. ICE deliberately captures the most vulnerable people in our state just to ensure that the Wyatt has money to stay open. The Wyatt is placing monetary value on human bodies, human lives, just to offset the fact that it is a failing prison. It is nationally infamous for its brutal and unsafe conditions. This is humiliating.
We are currently a year into a global pandemic that has killed millions of people based on the disgusting and insanitary conditions. It is unreal that the Wyatt is still even open. Rhode Island should not continue to have the stain of the Wyatt further mar our state's history. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you. Next witness we have is Celia. Good evening, Celia. You have the floor on House Bill 5749. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, my name is Celia Contreras. I'm 21 years old. I was born and raised in Central Falls, Rhode Island. I'm now a senior at NYU. My relationship with Wyatt extends as long as I was 8 years old. In collaboration with ICE, my father was in detention in Wyatt for a few weeks before he was eventually moved to another ICE detention facility center. Since then, I've participated in sports that are hosted, as well as our practices are hosted right next to Wyatt. It's a really very sad presence to have in that community. You can often hear the prisoners yelling really painful yells, painful screams for help. That's just a really, I think, awful presence to have in our community, and I think it can very much be used for more community resources. The community hasn't had a community center in years. I participated in the community center when it was there as a child. And then I know the bill is also for alternative resources of not having these prisoners that now displaced out of state. I think that's very important. Commute out of state to see a family member is not ethical at all. So I think just the presence of Wyatt in the community is not beneficial to it at all. So yeah, I'm for Bill H 5749.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions from committee? Next witness we have is Darcy Denigan. Good evening, Darcy. We're here discussing House Bill 5749. You have the floor. Please limit yourself to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Darcy Denigan. I grew up in Rhode Island, and my family came to Rhode Island from Italy and from Ireland 100 years ago. And if ICE had been invented at the turn of the 20th century instead of the 21st, I'm sure some of my family would have been in a prison like Wyatt. In April, when COVID got to Rhode Island, my kids and I joined a car protest at the Wyatt. We drove past with our signs, and we saw men hitting the windows. We didn't see any of them wearing masks. My kids kept asking me why the men were there. I wasn't sure what to say, because when kids see someone hitting a window in desperation, there's no amount of platitudes or abstractions that will satisfy them. I think there's nothing to say. There's only things we can do. So I'm calling in support of all three bills. Let's stop contracts with ICE. Let's shut Wyatt down. And let's keep everyone in there safe until it closes. I've been listening tonight, and I understand that there are technicalities that House members are wrangling with for all three of these bills. But Rhode Island can do way better than this. People made these laws. They're recent, and if people made these laws and regulations, people can change them. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for calling in for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? No. Next witness we have is Molly Scavuzzo Duggan. Good evening, Molly. We're here discussing House Bill 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the chairman and the members of this committee for allowing us the opportunity to speak on this. We've heard a lot of testimony tonight. As a Rhode Islander, I denounce not just for-profit prisons, but prisons in general. I was born in West Kingston. I grew up there. I came to Providence a little over 10 years ago. We've heard many people call in tonight and provide heartfelt testimony regarding the atrocities being committed at the Wyatt and how it tears communities apart and the lives lost as a consequence of this institution. This is not the advertised promise that immigrants came to this country in search of. While we have heard a lot tonight, as I've mentioned before, I particularly want to remind members of this committee of the hunger strike that occurred last April in protest of unsanitary conditions and the lack of COVID protections, and how ICE spokesman John Mohan so shamefully tried to blame it on the people captured inside, as if they had much of a choice as to the conditions they were forced into. I urge members of the House to pass this legislation and do what's right by our communities here in Rhode Island. And while I appreciate that members of the House assume that they've heard much of the same testimony from several different people tonight, I would like to provide a gentle reminder to the committee and chairman that if you're hearing so many Rhode Islanders express the same concerns, then it would indicate how deeply the existence of this facility affects Central Falls in particular and Rhode Islanders in general. We have respectfully waited all night. It is your turn to hear us out. Thank you, and I yield my time on that note.
Okay, any questions of the witness? Thank you. Next witness we have is Sean Richardson.
Hello.
Good evening, Sean. We're here discussing House Bill 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
Yes, so this is the, if I have this correct, this is the bill to end the contract with Wyatt.
Essentially, more or less. There's some technicalities there, but that's effectively what it would do.
Okay, my testimony is mainly based around shutting the detention center down because of its inhumane nature and how it relates to people. I studied sociology at Providence College and am from Central Rhode Island, and I can see these firsthand, these inhumane natures and how people are treated and how people are socialized based on certain things. Due to the inhumane nature, people are dying, and especially with COVID-19, and it's heartbreaking to think that people I know or people that are not of my direct circle but are outer of that as well are fearful and scared and all of that. And I think that I really do support this and the termination of the contract because of this and how people are being treated and how government officials should be held accountable and it should be people first and all of that. As you can tell, I'm not as prepared. It's 9:37 p.m. And for the most part, I just really wish that the contract can be terminated and that the people of this area are really just taken care of and aren't fearful for what's going on and aren't terrified for their lives, essentially. And that should be the goal of everything that we do as people and organizers and etc. So that's really all I have for the most part.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Sean, and for your patience hanging in there, as well as to all the other witnesses. Thank you for your patience. It's been a long night, and a lot of people have had to wait a long time to testify, and we appreciate that. Any questions for the witness from the committee? The next witness we have is Katie. Good evening, Katie. Welcome. We're here still discussing House Bill 5749. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to speak in support of H5749. I'm a hospice nurse, and I can never forget the story of Hugh Liang. I know he's been discussed already tonight, but I want to talk about his case from my perspective. During his last few weeks at Wyatt, he had lost a lot of weight and was complaining of excruciating back pain. Wyatt denied him an independent medical evaluation. He was also dragged by the arms and legs for pretending to be sick. After Mr. Eng's lawyers filed a petition, a judge ordered a medical evaluation. He was then diagnosed with a broken spine and terminal cancer. He died 5 days later.
He was 34 years old. Terminal cancer that can break the spine of a 34-year-old is incredibly painful. I see this pain in my work. It is beyond cruel to deny treatment, comfort, and pain medication to a human who is this ill, this kind of ill. To me, it is a violation of a sacred right of all dying people to have dignity and comfort. The level of cruelty it takes to drag and shackle a person in their last weeks and days of cancer terrifies me to my core. It terrifies me because this level of dehumanization becomes the basis for genocide and slavery. A prison where humanity fails has no place anywhere. It is a danger to all of us, and we can stop it here in Rhode Island. Closing Wyatt will never give Mr. Eng back the comfort and dignity he was denied, but maybe we can restore some of our dignity in Rhode Island through the passage of this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Is there any questions from members of the committee? Thank you again. Next witness that we have is Andy Birch. Next witness we have is Robert Hoffman. Good evening, Robert. How are you?
Good. How's it going?
Not too bad. We're here still discussing House Bill 5749. You're signed up in support. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you and welcome.
All right, welcome, or thank you. So my name is Robert Hoffman. I am the U.S. Outreach and Policy Coordinator for Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We're an organization of 200 chapters across more than 30 countries, leading the youth movement to end the war on drugs. I'm also a former Rhode Island resident and a former Rhode Island Democratic Party campaign worker testifying in support of H5 479 to end private prison contracts in the state. These private prison contracts have an incentive to promote the arrest and incarceration of our community members for their profit. These private prison shareholders and board members make blood money off of the surveillance, targeting, violence, poverty, and disruption of families caused by our practices of mass incarceration and policing, most of which is pushed under the guise of the war on drugs. The operation of these prisons is antithetical to freedom and our human rights. And as the U.S. hovers at about 2.3 million people behind bars, it is clear that private prisons serve as one of the pillars holding this disgusting, ineffective, and immoral system in place. One of the most notorious offenders of which is Wyatt Detention Center, known for being unsafe and unsanitary before COVID-19 hit. These conditions in the detention center deteriorated so much that in April of last year, 60-plus people launched a hunger strike to demand more sanitary conditions in the prison. The staff responded by retaliating against the hunger strikers by cutting out phone access and placing people in isolation. And when Central Falls tried to shut down Wyatt in 2019, there is a $130 million lawsuit that was filed to stymie the demands of the city and its elected officials, maintaining the center that shows a symbol of violence against immigrants and activists in a city very well known for its immigrant communities. So I'm sure that many more people will talk about Wyatt and the concerns around private prisons, but that is my testimony today. Please support H5479, and thank you for accepting my testimony today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman. Appreciate your testimony. Any questions from committee members? The next witness we have is Charlotte Richards. Good evening, Charlotte. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're here discussing House Bill 5749. You have the floor to testify. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Mine is very quick and short. I am a Rhode Islander who doesn't want our state imprisoning people in inhumane conditions for a profit. We need to show up for our community and support them, not lock them in cages. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your short and sweet testimony.
Oh, yes.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Next witness we have is Leah Wamelsdorf. Leah is not answering. And, well, I believe then that actually gets us through all of the witnesses who signed up on 5749. I want to thank everybody for calling in tonight and for their patience, and can assure everybody that the committee has heard you. It's been overwhelming, and I look forward to working with the sponsor and other members on the committee to try and address this issue. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion adjourned. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Nice job, Chair.
Well done.